The key to correcting problems in the human body starts with a clear understanding of human physiology. Once you understand that there are key foundational areas in human physiology that need to be supported by a person's structure, not by a tight, spastic overcompensating muscle. Many others get this wrong. The body structure must be stable in order to be considered healthy. It cannot be collapsed in any way, as this is a pathological state. So, what this means is that a person can be physically very strong and yet, oddly enough at the same time, pathologically unstable and collapsed. These strong bodies themselves often are experiencing a whole host of painful degenerative symptoms, which is not an example of a healthy body by any means. So this is why strength alone simply cannot be the standard measuring stick for health, as these strong bodies can break faster than weaker ones. If it were the standard, then hospitals would just need to make everyone do some exercises and build up their strength, and we would all be healthy and live forever. It seems like this approach should work, but as it turns out, this exact theory has already been tested numerous times and the results are always bad. Mainly because it is simply not feasible or showing any improvement to fix any of these severe health conditions they tested. In fact, it was a complete disaster, as it made the majority of their conditions worse. Therefore, it is probably safe to assume that strength training alone is probably not as good for your health as we all might have thought. So when we take all this into consideration, then the question becomes, what can we use as a standard to measure and compare the physiological differences between a healthy body and a pathological one? As the strength of a person is often easily confused as being an example of a healthy body condition, even though this strong body can be completely collapsed and degenerating worse than a weaker sedentary body. The standard for true health, as it turns out, is having both, just enough strength, or more than enough strength if you like. But this strength, to whatever degree you decide to build it up to, must also be accompanied by a very stable, healthy-looking posture, with the proper range of motion and a non-collapsing body structure. I think that most people have never heard of the importance of having a stable body structure. Not in the true sense as it being a vital requirement to achieve greater levels of health. No one ever mentions this to us in our daily lives as being a point of any major health concern, beyond at some point in time being scolded for not standing up straight in good posture, probably when we were kids. Beyond that, it's not looked at as a major health concern unless you so happen to look too twisted. Then maybe your doctor will let you know you're about to be picked on for looking too twisted and there's something wrong with you called scoliosis, so you might be frightened into having an expensive surgery to make you straight. Usually they pick on twisty-looking teenagers. This must seem odd to these teenagers that the doctor thinks there is something wrong with them, even though they feel perfectly fine and their bodies work just as well as everyone else's body does. These practices are particularly medieval because the only reason these bodies are picked on is because they are healthy and they tend to survive these life-altering surgeries. Surgeries that correct other types of posture distortions tend to be life-ending, so they don't pick on kids with these types of postures for good reason. Most of the time people are unaware of how they actually look to other people. They tend to only pay attention to how they feel, as they cannot see themselves the way other people do. And this is true that when you look at someone else, you can see them more clearly than they can see themselves. You can see how their body is shaped, and what their posture looks like as they move around. But there is little one can do to change the way their body shape looks to others. Of course, you can walk around with your shoulders back in an exaggerated posture, but that does nothing to fix your body's pathological structure problems. And there are different types of pathological body shapes, even some that you would think is perfectly fine, like overly flat and straight-looking bodies. These flat bodies are actually some of the worst body structures a person can have. Probably worse than a twisty body. Even though they look straight, they are never bothered to do any surgery as they think that's normal. Well, that is until they get older and the discs wear out abnormally fast. This is because they are actually the most unstable body shape you can have. And that look of being flat and straight is due to their body being so unstable that the body has to sacrifice mobility for more stability that their body is lacking. This is why these flat posture bodies can actually wear out much quicker than slumpy or twisted looking bodies, as they are more rigid than they should be. The irony is that we all think that these flat bodies have good posture. Nothing could be further from the actual case of the matter. This is why so many strong bodies suddenly develop serious health conditions even though they think they are perfectly healthy. Same is true for people who don't drink or smoke and eat as healthy as they can. They are all unaware of the most important aspect of their health until it shows up all of the sudden. Many people's health routines are actually not making them healthy. In fact, these routines are probably causing them to be unhealthy. This is a profound thing to suggest about a person's health routine, as most people will swear by them, even after their health declines as a result of this self-inflicted damage. If you know what you're looking at when it comes to having a healthy body. As it turns out, the body structure is the most important thing to look at. You can know the true state of health by looking where the key foundations of the body are located. If you see that someone's key foundational structures are in an abnormal position, then you can pretty much guarantee that this person's body has collapsed at some level and they are in a perpetual state of accelerated aging and degenerating despite what they might think or how they feel. This abnormal acceleration is due to the pressure increase from the collapse. This will always be true, considering that if the person's body wasn't collapsed, then it would be impossible for this person to feel even the slightest amount of pain, fatigue or any other symptoms. Especially for no apparent reason. There are a million ways the body can become collapsed. Usually, it's one problem layer on top of another problem. Anything that pushes a person's lumbar, rib cage, or thoracic spine forward is in a state of collapse. Especially if the collapse occurs in the lumbar area, as it is responsible for holding up most of your body's weight up against the pull of gravity. Also, the rib cage along with the thoracic spine are the main foundational structures of the body that can collapse and cause health problems. The body cannot be in a state of collapse for very long before things start to malfunction and become symptomatic, as it's stuck and unable to correct itself. This leaves the body in a continual state of degeneration, and that is being damaged day in and day out. Most of what people are doing to resolve these issues are actually just masking the symptoms, but they usually exacerbates the collapse. So how is it that this collapse can be worsened, but at the same time the person's symptoms can temporarily feel some relief? The answer is that the body will release cortisol if it feels that the collapse is worsening by something pushing it further the wrong direction. Your body just does this naturally on its own. This is why when people experience extreme traumas, they usually are numb to any symptoms or pain, because the body reacts to severe trauma from injuries by releasing hormones such as cortisol to mask the symptoms. This is also how drugs also mask symptoms. This can confuse people, because once a symptom is masked by drugs or by a cortisol release, whatever you did to mask the symptoms was only covering up something that was probably going to go away on its own. This explains why no matter what the person's age so happens to be or their supposed state of health, if that person's structure is collapsed, then degeneration is occurring in their body, and sometimes they are unaware that they are doing things to the body that are making the condition worse. You should go to someone trained in hydrostructural to analyze your body for collapses. They are the only modern-day experts who have the skills to accurately analyze human physiology and detect the location of these collapses and ultimately correct them. The reason why you want to get your body fixed and collapse-free is because, as it turns out, this is the key to gaining overall health. Good diets, drinking enough water, detoxing, being strong and younger all help you to deal with the collapse better, but eventually the collapse will wear you out, and optimal health is just not possible without correcting the body structure first. Ask yourself, have you ever experienced pain? If the answer is yes, then you are collapsed. So no matter what your current health condition is, even if it's miserable, it can be corrected with hydrostructural, as it is proven to correct structural collapses in the body. Unless you are collapse-free, you are in fact aging and degenerating at an accelerated rate. So what can you do? As it turns out, there is no magic pill, diet or exercise that can fix these collapses. You can increase your energy by living a healthy lifestyle, but regardless of any other countermeasures, the collapse will continue to cause damage as the body struggles day after day to counterbalance against the collapse. In order to stay active even in this compromised state, the body can twist itself into all sorts of pathological shapes, and in most cases trying to force the twist straight will just make things worse. You have to correct the major collapse and the body will untwist the compensations by itself. Nowadays, how most body therapies get some temporary relief for people with symptoms is by pushing the pressure in the body around, but most fail to do it in the correct direction and the symptoms eventually become worse. So it is actually not beneficial to long-term health to have theories of the past pushing your body the wrong way. They are unaware what is the correct way to push the body. So these incorrect theories are everywhere. It's difficult to address them all, but it is best to avoid them. There are a lot of countermeasures that the body can employ to deal with being pushed in the wrong direction. It might even temporarily take the pressure off the area that was beginning to hurt, but since you ultimately are being pushed the wrong way, this adds another layer of problems, on top of the older layers, which eventually will just end up increasing the tension even more and cause larger amounts of damage. Think of it like a rope that has many knots, and by pushing things the wrong way you're adding more knots that gets tied into many directions of tension. Of course, the body twists up in its own way, and you could see from a full spine X-ray what this twisting looks like. It's different from body to body, but the cause is all the same, but the areas of tension affect each body in a unique way, but overall adding new layers usually makes the person feel fatigued. Just like there is no magic pill that can untie a group of knots in a rope, you have to physically pull the knots apart in the correct order, and you can't start in the middle of the knots because you will just increase the tension. The point is you have to follow the order things were tied up in order to untie them. Basically, a lot of symptoms, pain and even pathological disorders are caused by deep-rooted problems that are under intense tension, but you cannot get to those layers until you first fix the layers above them. The more layers you have, the longer it's going to take your body. And at the same time, you also have to avoid creating any new layers by doing anything that will collapse the body and slow down the progress, and the new layers themselves need to be corrected as well first before you can correct the deeper problems that are probably responsible for your symptoms. You have to untie it knot by knot the same way that it was tied up. You also have to unwind these problems in the body layer by layer in a similar way. It took decades of research to perfect this unwinding process that hydrostructural has discovered. Why would there be layers of problems? The body has a unique ability to compensate in a way to deal with a collapse in its structure that is stuck beyond the body's ability to correct them. But compensating for problems is different than correcting them. This is where hydrostructural is needed to help the body fix the collapses it can't correct by itself. Otherwise, with one collapse, our bodies would break. Which they do not, and this is why people with severely misshapen body structures can still walk around and for the most part function normally, even though it's quite obvious that their structure is collapsed. That is because old injuries that cause a collapse in your body affect other structures and cause them to twist out of place as well, but it does this for stability purposes or counterbalancing against abnormal pressures created from the collapse. Most diseases are actually just aging and wearing out too fast from this increase in pressure as your structure is compromised and twisting to counterbalance itself. People's bodies wear out faster the more collapsed they are, and at a faster rate than the body can repair the damage caused by the increased pressure from the structural collapse on the tissues inside of the body. So is it correct to say that it is the pressure that is causing damage to a person's body as opposed to the current genetic disease model? The truth about this remains obscure, but regardless of what modern science believes, you can correct these problems and notice immediate improvement in your health condition. Someone eventually will have to do the research to figure out the pathological effects on the tissues from this pressure due to abnormal collapses in the body. By learning hydrostructural, you will be able to correct the collapse present in these key foundational areas of the body. Because hydrostructural is light years ahead of any other approach to accurately and safely correcting these collapses. Suddenly we find out that feeling uncomfortable or painful is optional. Aging at an accelerated rate and dealing with a multitude of diseases are optional. You will have a surplus of energy that was being stolen from your body to compensate for the structural collapses, but once these areas are stabilized, you will have ample amounts of energy to do the things you want to do in life. How can these claims be verified? At this point, the correction methods being utilized by hydrostructural are a result of a culmination of years of research into advanced physiological discoveries too numerous to mention. These innovative techniques employed by hydrostructural are the next chapter of this extensive modern research. Despite their revolutionary nature, many of these discoveries have unfortunately remained unnoticed and underutilized by mainstream medical and health practices. Hydrostructural has discovered a unique science that utilizes the hydraulic nature of the body to make corrections in the physical structure without causing any new collapses. This was a tremendous leap ahead of all the previous advancing technologies and research, as earlier attempts were still responsible for collapsing the body even more to some degree. It has been understood for decades that a whole new approach would have to be developed in order to achieve better results without the pitfalls associated with exercise, massage, chiropractic, yoga, etc. Hydrostructural went beyond the common concepts of these previous remedies to develop a new approach to make corrective changes in human physiology, further improving health technology at an accelerated rate. As one improvement tends to build on top of the next until this new science of biohydraulics emerged out of all this progress as a more effective means of applying a corrective force and improving health conditions in a way not previously thought possible. Corrective therapies aimed at addressing long-term foundational health problems face significant challenges. If the body becomes misaligned or disrupted at its compensation patterns, This may release cortisol, which can temporarily mask symptoms but ultimately lead to further issues. These temporary numbing down manipulations are not viable for long-term health. Many people struggle to understand that some treatments that make them feel better in the short term may not be beneficial for their overall health in the long term. Various factors can damage the body without causing immediate discomfort. In some cases, the release of cortisol can temporarily mask underlying problems, creating a false sense of improvement. This complexity makes it difficult to evaluate the effectiveness of treatments. Often, short-term effects are mistaken for successful outcomes, leading to the incorrect assumption that the right approach is being used. This confusion contributes to the multitude of opinions on health and body repair. While many treatments produce some effect, the release of cortisol complicates the analysis of whether these effects are genuinely positive. Consequently, there are numerous differing views on this topic. Hydrostructural focuses not on temporary fixes but on the long-term stabilization of collapsing structures. It aims to provide effective, predictable, and consistent corrections to these issues. Feel free to contact me if you want to know more or debate me about this emerging science. This new science was researched and created for good. Out of sheer luck, the working model of hydrostructural was discovered. This approach is creating life-changing and permanent corrections to people's health. The biohydraulic method was utilized in a way to accomplish this task, focusing on precision outcomes. Consequently, this technology is called hydrostructural, which is the natural science of biohydraulics and how it can be manipulated to make corrections to the structure of the human body. I am confident that it will also work on animals and pets as well, but for now, we only have a working model for humans, dogs and cats. There is research being done on horses as well, but at this present moment this is still a work in progress. As in the case of a larger animal, there is a requirement for some hardware to be engineered in order to make the appropriate corrections.